Hi everyone, what's up? So here we got a new challenge. Valve clearance for this MT-09. MT-09 is always a special bike. Cross-plane 3-cylinder. The design, the styling, the engine, it's really nice. The mileage of this bike is reaching around 40 km, so it's time for the first valve clearance check. So first thing first, we need to remove the fuel tank. I remove the fuel tank. After removing the fuel tank, we got the access to the airbox. And after that, we need to remove the whole airbox assembly. So we remove the airbox cover first. Let's also take the chance to check the air filter element. Take the chance to clean the front part of the airbox. Let's take the chance to clean the underneath part of the fuel tank as well. The K&N air filter on this bike still looks okay, but to be honest, I don't like K&N very much compared to the original air filter. Now it's time to remove the whole airbox system. The airbox is connected to the engine with 3 screws with the intake manifold. This one, and over there. That's the throttle body of the bike. This bike utilizes an electronic throttle body. That means when you twist the throttle, there's only an electric signal sending to the motor, and then the motor controls the throttle. So here, the actuation of the throttle cable only sends a signal to the ECU. The advantage of electronic throttle body is very obvious. First, the opening of the throttle is much more smoother because the control accuracy of the motor is much better than your hands. And also because of this, the throttle cable and the throttle butterfly is not connected, and this way you can play with the relationship between them. That's why we got traction control and power modes. The throttle body is very clean, so here we don't need to take any action. So here we can see the room above the engine is very tight, so it's almost impossible, or we can see even it's possible, it takes lots of effort to remove the engine top cover from the top. So we need to remove the radiator next step. So after evaluation, I realized taking the valve cover from the front direction is the only way we can do, because it's too complicated removing the valve cover from the top. Unfortunately, this bike just changed the coolant last month, so it would be a really big waste to throw away the existing coolant. So I decided we try our best to reuse it. So here is a very clean container, and I flush it with distilled water to make sure there's no additional chemical hazard inside. So the only liquid here is distilled water with no additional ions. Then I'm going to drain the coolant to this container to make sure the coolant is clean. Yeah, as we can see, the coolant is very clean, so that's why we want to reuse it. Well, although this time we try our best to reuse the coolant, it's not recommended. So my suggestion is that we try our best to schedule the coolant change and the valve clearance at the same time. Then we go ahead to remove the radiator. To remove the radiator, we need to remove the side panel here and the left side. Remove the outside layer first, and then remove the two screws connected to the radiator. Don't forget to disconnect the turning signal before you're removing it from the radiator. Now the radiator is already empty. Feel free to remove all the pipes. Here. Remove the protector and take the chance to clean out the fans. It's quite dirty. Carefully remove it. Alright. Okay, now we unplug all the pipes and then we try to clean it and make sure there's no particle dropping into the hose. Guys, we can see even we drain the coolant thoroughly, there's still some coolant left in the pipe. So that's why we want to do a coolant flush every time you change the coolant. And yes, guys, if you don't perform a coolant flush according to the procedure using the distilled water, that's the result. You will still have some residues inside the cooling system. It's not good for the bike. That's why every time I use distilled water to totally flush the bike and clean the reservoir thoroughly, I want my bike to be healthy, unless you don't care. Alright, now we got the radiator removed carefully. Remember to disconnect the wiring of the fan before you take away the radiator. Guys, just be extremely careful when you handle the radiator or remove from the bike. We don't want to hurt any of the fans over there, alright? The radiator fans are extremely vulnerable, so just be careful, extremely careful. Okay, it's great to see after removing the radiator we have lots of room to play with. Okay, as we can see, we got some aftermarket parts. I don't think it's like this on the stock bike. It's supposed to be a resonator. So now we can work on the top cover of the cylinder. So first, we want to disconnect the connectors of the spark plug. One by one. I mean, it's not very easy to do it in one hand. Alright. Then we continue to remove the coils for the spark plug. Now we can remove it. Ah, man. You must be aware that it's not as easy as you see. I already plug it loose and then I remove it for you because it's impossible for me to do it with just one hand. And actually, it's very likely take you some effort to remove these ignition coils. Alright, now we continue to remove the cover of the valve. It has several Allen key screws, as you can see. Alright, now we can remove the valve cover to access the valves. And here we can see the crankshaft of the engine. For sure, this engine runs a double camshaft design with 4 valves each cylinder. So according to the Yamaha menu, this is labeled as cylinder 1, this is cylinder 2, this is cylinder 3. So this is the camshaft. You can see the profile of the cams. So to measure the valve clearance, we need to move the piston to its top dead center, which means it's the top position between the compression stroke and the combustion stroke. So, to put the cylinder 1 at its top dead center, we need to go to the left hand side of the engine, open the cover. Then we can use this screw inside the cover to rotate the flywheel. So be careful here, the Allen key is 14mm, so it's quite large. If you don't have it in your kit, you just purchase it, or you use a 14mm screw nut to make an adapter. And then we use a 19mm socket to rotate the flywheel. Also, we need to open this small screw so that we can see the marker on the flywheel for the top dead center. We rotate the flywheel till we see the camshaft behaves like this on the left cylinder. Carefully rotate the flywheel till we see the indicator on the flywheel align with the indicator on the engine case. So here we can see the valves and the camshafts. So these two are the exhaust valve for cylinder 1. These two are the intake valves for cylinder 1. And here are intake valves for cylinder 2, exhaust valve for cylinder 2, intake valve for cylinder 3, exhaust valves for cylinder 3. So now cylinder 1 is at its top dead center. We can measure the intake valves and exhaust valves for cylinder 1. Now we can use the feeler gauge of different thickness to test the valve clearance. So according to the manual, the intake valve clearance should be between 0.11mm and 0.2mm. The exhaust valve clearance is between 0.26 and 0.3mm. So for the left side valve of the cylinder 1, we can see 0.15mm feeler gauge can slide in with a little bit drag. But 0.18 feeler gauge cannot get through. So the valve clearance is between 0.15 to 0.18. And according to the dragging force level, when I test with the 0.15mm feeler gauge, I denote the valve clearance to be 0.15 plus. The 0.15 plus here means 0.16. That's our estimation. So similarly for the exhaust valve, 0.25mm feeler gauge can slide in very easily. But the 0.28 feeler gauge stuck over there. So according to the dragging level, I denote it as 0.25 plus plus because it feels very loose. And the 0.25 plus plus means 0.27. So now we finished measuring cylinder 1. So both intake valves are at 0.15 plus. Both exhaust valves are at 0.25 plus plus. It's a good sign, and both the intake valves and exhaust valves are in the range. So next we move to cylinder 2. So the Yamaha MT-09 has a very special engine. As I mentioned, it's a cross-plane crankshaft 3-cylinder. Cross-plane means that the crank pins are not on the same plane as compared to the traditional flat plane crankshaft. So here the crank pins are placed 120 degrees with each other. And the firing order is 240 degrees apart from each other. That means the top dead center of cylinder 2 is 240 degrees away from the top dead center of cylinder 1. But if you cannot understand, it's totally fine, alright? What you need to do is rotate the flywheel 240 degrees. So for example, we start from here. We need to crank it to 10 o'clock around here. That's 240 degrees. So now I crank the flywheel to 10 o'clock position around here. And here we can see the cam profile of cylinder 2 should be same as previously on the cylinder 1. It's symmetric and both on the outside. So right now piston 2 is at top dead center. We can measure the valves accordingly on cylinder number 2. So now I finished measuring cylinder 2. Then we rotate another 240 degrees to measure cylinder 3. Crank it to around 2 o'clock position over here. That's another 240 degrees. So similarly, we rotate the flywheel till we see the cam profile like this. So now I view the engine from top. As we measured, the valve clearance for cylinder 1, cylinder 2, and cylinder 3 are all in the range. So luckily for us this time, we don't need to adjust the valve clearance. Yeah, but we can see the cylinder number 1 and number 2, the valve clearance is quite good, but on cylinder 3, the intake valve is becoming tighter. One of the intake valve of cylinder 3 is only measured at 0.10 plus, which is very close to the lower limit 0.11. So we can guess next time very likely the right hand side intake valve of cylinder number 3 need to be adjusted. Anyway, the next valve clearance check will be the mileage at 80,000. So we are safe to go another 40,000. So now we install back everything and enjoy. So we tighten the screws of the valve. Remember to tighten them in a crisscross pattern and tighten them to the same torque around 14 Nm. Similar principle applies when we install back the airbox. Crisscross pattern